You're advocating for the downfall of society.
I'm not advocating for that. I'm saying take the McDonald's off of every street corner.
So that's what I just said. When I said that you were advocating for society removing all of the dopamine buttons, you said that wasn't what you were advocating.
No. That's not
like people who get hooked on, whatever drug.
Sure.
Not true.
How are you guys feeling about this week's movie, A Scanner Darkly?
I feel like it was a fever dream, and I didn't really watch it.
I feel like I wasn't high enough to watch it.
Well, how high were you?
It was awkward. It was hard to follow, and the animation was a little jumpy.
By the way, audience, spoiler alert: if you have not read or watched A Scanner Darkly, I recommend you do one of those before watching this video, because they're good.
It came out in 2006. It's their fault if they hadn't seen it yet, even though I literally watched it today.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of times you run across a YouTube video about something that looks kind of interesting, and this is definitely one story that is best entered blind, in my opinion. But that being said, if you feel like you're not going to watch it, well, fine, stick around. The animation is very different, and it's what originally drew me to this movie. This was a couple years ago, but they use the technique is called rotoscoping, and it's where they filmed the movie. I'm sure you guys probably picked up on this. They really filmed it live action, and then after they did all of that, they went in and basically, animated over the digital footage that they had taken. And a lot of frames are, hand animated frame by frame, but then there's also a lot of weird interpolation. And that's where you get these strange effects where when the camera's moving, the objects in the foreground and in the background oftentimes move separately from each other, and it's like super trippy and weird. But I think it's perfect for the subject of this film, which is addiction and slowly like losing your mind. And losing your grasp on reality, and I think it works really well.
It does work really well. It would not have been as good of a film without that technique. The rotoscoping makes it feel really jumpy and like you're tweaking as the viewer, and it sort of makes the characters themselves jump and kind of twitch a little bit as if they're on substances, which they are. The filming for this movie was finished within, I think, 23 days. But the actual rotoscoping and animation process took, I think, 18 months. So that was the strong majority of the work on this film, was the actual rotoscoping. And it does seem very painstaking.
I was just curious, if this was just filmed as live action, if it had been a live action movie, would it have affected us differently, or would we have seen it differently?
Yeah.
The rotoscoping, I mean, it's a cool procedure, but it seemed kind of jumpy to me, and I think maybe that was intentional, because it did the constant movement of the animation made it feel like you were tweaking as a viewer, and maybe that's what they were going for. But it was odd to watch. It really was.
I think if this would have been live action, it would have actually been somewhat boring, and you would have had to infer more so what was happening to the characters rather than just blatantly seeing it. I think if this would have been live action, they probably would not have attempted the bugs. They probably would not have attempted the shifting suits. And I think the animation style kind of lent them a little bit of extra creativity that they needed. I think if this would have just been a live action story that was like relying on dialogue, it would have been I'll just say boring.
I think it would have fell short, yeah.
Yeah, it would have fell short.
Because even with the animation, I feel like it fell short with the story.
Yeah, the story was a bit hard to follow. After I finished the film, I had to actually take a minute, process what I had just watched, and try to piece together the plot in my head. And once I did that, it made more sense. But in the actual moment, I felt like my brain was probably about 20 to 30 seconds behind what I was seeing on the screen. It took that long to process for me, which, I mean, was cool. That's a unique experience.
Yeah, I feel I have good things and bad things to say about the presentation of the story. On the one hand, I don't think that a movie is obligated to be understandable on the first watch through. I think it's actually sometimes some of the best films are like super cryptic and you're just totally confused, and you get that allows you to rewatch it later and understand more. Uh, and maybe even on the third and fourth rewatches, you're picking up on things that you didn't notice. And so there's that side of it. On the other hand, I will say this movie is somewhat hectic in terms of the pacing. It's like scene, scene, scene. Like things are just happening, and I think part of the reason for that is this movie is actually overall, by and large, it's very strictly allegiant to the book, which was written by Philip K. And I have read the book. I read it recently, and a lot of the movie is like scene for scene, line for line, what happens in the book. And the issue with that is that the pacing in books is not the same as pacing for movies. And I think that one of my criticisms of A Scanner Darkly is that it kind of just lacks the structure that a film needs. Uh, and so it leaves it feeling a little bit like meandering, but also like hectic in pace.
It does seem more like a project than a finished product. Would you agree with that statement?
Um, a little bit. Well, I think it's just they didn't take very many chances. I see this more as like an like almost like a Shakespeare adaptation. So I don't know if you guys have seen the live action. It's well, most Romeo and Juliet's are live action, but the one where it's set in modern day and they have guns and they're gangsters and all that.
With Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yes, with Leo. Have you seen that, Will?
I've never seen that.
Well, I actually like that
Curse
movie a
on
lot.
both your houses.
It's a great movie, and they just did a really interesting take on Shakespeare. They didn't change the story much at all, other than adapting it to modern day.
I'm gonna say
Um,
it was the exact same story, except they had guns instead of swords because the lines were exactly about the same.
right. I feel a
Yeah, it
little
was.
bit the same way about A Scanner Darkly. Is they took a great book by Philip K. Dick, and they did a really interesting take on it, but they didn't really turn it into a film as much as they maybe could have. That being said, I mean it's very unique, and I think it's entertaining.
I had a hard time keeping up with the timing. I mean, there was times where they were in the living room having conversations, and then all of a sudden, um, Arctur is at the at the computer screen looking at video. So it's hard to keep an idea of what the timeline was. And some of those characters were so weird in certain situations, and then in others they weren't. And it was like, are they even the same character?
Okay, that was
Uh,
completely intentional. All of that.
well, yeah, but like the Hank character, when it comes to find out that it was actually Donna the whole time. So was Donna lying about the I do a lot of cocaine, please don't touch me, or was that just
Yeah, that was a
a
lie.
story?
That was a lie. She
Okay,
was an undercover police officer the entire time.
Little
okay.
late, but yeah, I agree that the I think that the confusing nature, some of the confusing nature of the way the story is told is absolutely intentional because our main protagonist, Bob Arctor slash Fred, is losing his mind, and the drug that he is taking uh, as part of his job as an undercover cop um, is causing the hemispheres of his brain to basically communicate information that they're not supposed to, but also separate information that they're not supposed to. And his identities as the undercover police agent Bob or Fred, and as Bob Arctor, the drug addict, are splitting essentially from each other. And by the end of the movie, he's not even aware when he's Fred that Bob Arctor is himself. And so it's like, yeah, you lose your mind with Fred as the movie progresses.
He had a third name too when he was on the farm.
Bruce,
Yep.
Yeah,
which
that's
I'm
what I'm
not sure
making
if
my
that's
wrong.
his real name.
No, no, they gave him New Path gave him that name
Oh, really? Okay, interesting.
because they
Um,
don't want him to remember anything about his previous life. They just want him to create their drugs for them. So he's Bruce now.
right. So, one thing that I'll say that I'm not a big fan of. This is more of a criticism for Philip K. Dick than it is the movie adaptation. But I personally do not like some of the uh, like paranoid, uh, sort of deep state stuff that's in this story. Um, the whole concept that the rehab centers are producing the drug to cause people to go to New Path. I think that's kind of a pretty direct allegory to the criticisms levied at pharmaceutical industries, saying that like, oh yeah, the big pharma is trying to keep you sick so they can keep you on drugs. Personally, I don't subscribe to those ideas, and um, along with that, the police state ideas. Most of Philip K. Dick's books have like an ultra surveillance state where the police are watching you and everything you do, and everything is just like the government has overstepped its bounds to a ridiculous extent. And while there are valid criticisms in that vein that can be made, I just think that it's a little bit overboard in this story, and to me it detracts from the more meaningful ideas about addiction itself, and the real stories of how people get addicted and how it ruins their lives. I think that the police state stuff and the corruption stuff just kind of detracts. But I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Um, I think it's appropriate because if you look at what the film was made for, at the very end when the credits are about to roll, it essentially says this film was made for the people who did some things wrong but probably were too harshly punished. Obviously, talking about drug addicts who eventually paid with their lives or paid with their health. And I think if you look at this film from the perspective of um, it's trying to say that yes, these people are addicted to a substance. It's ruining their lives. They know it is, and they're still taking it. But it's not as much of their fault as society would make it seem. So when you sort of dilute the criticism, and you can put blame on the authoritarian police state, you can put blame on the rehab centers, you can put blame on the drug dealers, but the drug addicts themselves are kind of getting a pass in this movie, and the film is dedicated to like 20 people, most of which have died or have severe cognitive issues because of their drug addiction. So I get what you're saying. Maybe the whole Big Brother police state thing wasn't overplayed like 20 years ago. But I think that since this film is essentially saying drug addicts, we know it's not all your fault. We sympathize with you. You, we know you're still human. I feel like it's okay with those lens in mind
Perhaps.
because this is like, I mean, there's so many things in media that's like drug addicts bad, drug addicts deserve to die, they're lower than humans, it's their fault. So this is like the one thing where it's kind of diverting the blame to other sources to a very large extent because the drug addicts in the film are never actually like blamed for what's happening to them. It's just kind of happening to them, in my opinion, because it's always either New Path or the police or undercover cops or whatever. So I'm not really mad at it. This is like the one film where the drug addicts are the true protagonists and they just happen to be on drugs.
Well, I think that there are criticisms levied at the drug addicts, and I think that their just total irrational way of thinking is on display a lot of the time. The issue is that those questions of, so like the at the end of the movie where it says that it's dedicated to people who were punished entirely too much for their wrongdoing, which was trying drugs. That's from the author's note of the book. There's an extended little. It's like 2 pages. Philip K. Dick writes about basically his opinion that um, doing drugs is a choice and it's a bad choice, but the consequences for doing it are far worse than the intentions, essentially. It's like, it's sort of just like irresponsibility, and then that breeds like the total destruction of your being, which is just an, in his view, it's a worse punishment than what most addicts deserve. That's a really interesting question, and I don't think that I agree with his perspective. Um, I would like to think about it more. Uh, I would like to empathize. The thing is, I just feel that that's distracted from because of the whole, like, yeah, in this story, it's literally the rehab center's fault. I just think that those storylines detract a little bit.
Well, let me look, not to put you on the spot because I know you basically just said you'd want to think about it more, but New Path within the film, it turns out, so they're the drug rehab facility. It turns out that they are literally creating the problem and then profiting from it. Do you really think that there's no parallels to the real world, like big pharma, as they say? I mean, do you see the parallels there? Or do you just think that they're not substantiated realistically?
I feel that they're not substantiated realistically. I think that there are certainly isolated cases of corruption and bad things happening, but I think that by and large, the system is doing what it's designed to do, and at least in the case of, like, okay, America's health problems, I don't think you can blame America's health problems on the pharmacy industry at all. I think you can blame it a lot more on certain food industries, but really, it's more than anything else. It's a cultural thing. There are so many factors that go into the health of a population, especially in the last 100 years. Our lifestyles have changed so drastically, and I feel that people have a tendency to oversimplify really, really complicated subjects. I don't know. I tend to focus a little bit more on the personal choices that people make.
Well, Kevin, I want to get your thoughts. Let me just say one more thing about that. So, completely anecdotal thing here, but whenever I walk outside and I see somebody completely tweaking and they're just a zombie and they're clearly not coherent, I don't look at them and personally think, okay, this is 100% your fault. That's just how I feel. And in most cases, I feel like it's half their fault at most. That's just how I personally tend to feel. I know some people look at them and think that they're like subhuman scum. Um,
Well, but do you look at them and say, like, that's Jeff Bezos's fault, or that's the pharmacy industry's fault? Like,
no, no, no.
is there something specific else that you can blame, or is it more of a general, like,
It's general, like, okay,
environment?
it's more like, okay, I know for a fact this person's life circumstances did not cater to them, and due to a combination of factors that I don't know, they ended up in this scenario. So, no, it's not like I'm blaming Jeff Bezos or whatever you said. But at the same time, I'm not completely blaming them as an individual because I feel like that's equally as irresponsible. Because it's clearly a widespread problem. They're not like the only person on the street who is severely affected by their habits. I mean, it's a very widespread problem, especially in my area. So, I mean, there is a cause, and there are similar causes that all of these people are kind of getting funneled into. That you could consider it outside of their control. But anyway, I want to get Kevin's thoughts on the whole big pharma versus how it's represented in the film and drug addicts and drug abuse in general here.
Well, I'm going to say, pertaining to what you guys were just talking about, the blame is across the board. It's not just the individual. You can blame big pharma. I can say that you can blame insurance companies, and stuff like that. Nowadays, when somebody is in pain or sick, their idea is to go to the hospital and get medicine or something like that. Insurance doesn't cover it, so they can't get the medication they're prescribed, so they self-medicate with drugs. Whether it be weed, heroin, methamphetamines, whatever. And this is where the pandemic the epidemic comes from. Is That's where most of the drug addicts come from, is the fact that they're self medicating for other problems. There are countries in the world where healthcare is free and drugs like this are provided. Say in Amsterdam, you're allowed to do whatever drug you want as long as you get it from the government. They don't have drug problems like we do. They don't have people stealing people's Xboxes to sell for drugs because they're able to get access to it. That comes, like I said, that comes down to insurance companies and big pharma. We do things different here in America than we other countries do. As far as representation in the movie, I would say it was a pretty good representation that the company was behind the whole thing. It's real easy to get caught up in the conspiracies that big pharma is the problem and they're raising up prices and they're creating this epidemic. Yes, obviously it is the individual's fault because it's our personal choice to partake of these drugs, whether we have access to them or not. But the fact that they're available and they're rampant is, that's different kind of factors, factoring into that. It's hard to say one way or the other. I mean, you can't really blame any one person for the problem that's going on.
If I may, and this kind of might get us a little bit off of the specific subject, but there are facets of healthcare that are completely where the professionals are creating a problem and then their remedy is what they're paid for. Specifically, like plastic surgery and a lot of elective surgeries, people are convinced that they need this to look better. And of course, at the end of the day, it is their choice. But I mean, a surgeon is offering them a way out of what they perceive as like their own ugliness or something of that nature, and they're essentially paying $50,000, $30,000 to get their nose completely shattered and redone. I know that gets off into other things about like people have the right to do that if they want to, if they think it would make them look better, if they have some self-conscious thing with their face. But at the same time, that is a legitimate, like, multi-million dollar industry that was completely created when a doctor was like, I can slice you up and make you look closer to a societal beauty standard. You need this, so come into my office. So if you want to take it on like a bare bones level, it is kind of like an industry literally creating the problem and then solving it for money.
I don't know that that applies very well because I mean we're talking about people who are able to afford 5 to 6 figure surgeries. Uh, Generally a different population from like people who get hooked on, whatever drug.
Sure.
Not true. Not true. Drugs go across all whether you're poor, rich, got insurance, don't have insurance. Drugs affect everybody.
They disproportionately affect the poor.
Oh, I mean, yeah, it does affect the poor. Because the poor can't afford the better stuff, the higher quality stuff. We end up with the stuff that's laced with fentanyl. And this is what the problem is. I mean, rich people have access to the drugs too. They just get a better quality. They pay more money for it. But there, you see in the news all the time about these celebrities who die of cocaine overdose. Of drug overdose. Their drug issues themselves. So it's not a class. I don't think it's really a class thing. I think it's. I mean, I guess class affects the quality of what you're actually getting a hold of.
I think it's an entirely different issue when you start talking about celebrities because like these are people who, as part of almost like their job, they're in partying circles and they're doing all this crazy stuff. But the thing is, they have the money for it, and huge amounts of money usually corrupts people pretty badly and can often, lead to their own death and overdosing. But like a lot of times when people talk about the issues with addiction in this country, it's more so in regards to people being addicted and because they need access to that drug and they don't have the money for it, they resort to all sorts of illegal means in order to get that drug. And they, I you you talk about the people like Will was talking about that you see on the street that are just like not there. Those people 90% of the time or more come from a poor background. It's not very frequent for people to go from middle class to just like on the street tweaking. It happens, but
Well, Alex, let me ask you a question. So, what do you think about the cases where, let's try to split it down the middle. So let's talk about specifically the middle class. What do you think about the cases where somebody it has a perfectly fine and functional life and they're supporting themselves and, maybe they get injured or they have some sort of pain, they go to their doctor and they're given a bottle of 40 Percocets or 40 Oxys and they get addicted. Like, so in that scenario, would you say, okay, that's entirely that person's fault because they didn't have impulse control and they took way more than they needed to? Or would you say that's more on the fault of the doctors for giving them like three times the amount of medication they needed? Like, or would you say it's an even split? I'm just curious what you think there.
in that specific scenario, it's I would say it's pretty split, and doctors have been called out a lot on the opioid overprescription. It's still a problem, but it's not as much of a problem as it was. But it was so bad that yeah, I mean they were prescribing it like candy, and it was just flooding the streets as well because people could just resell it because they were getting so much more than they needed. But even now, yeah, people probably get prescribed more than they need in a lot of cases. Is it a person's fault for getting hooked on Percocets because they were prescribed it for an injury? No. Is it that person's fault if they choose to ignore the signs of addiction, not to ask for help, but rather to just continue seeking it out either by lying to their doctor or by seeking out illegally? Yes, that's entirely their fault.
I get that. Well, with something like pain that like so you get a surgery done, everything's completely done correctly, you're patched up, all you have to do is heal. Pain is just a feeling. So in reality, are painkillers necessary in most cases? I mean, I've had a few surgeries where the end result was painful, and I was prescribed certain pills, and I took them, uh, and they helped, but were they necessary for my recovery? No, not at all. So, and I was always given genuinely 25 to sometimes even 30 pills per bottle, sometimes two bottles of 30 pills, and I only took like three. And that's not me trying to say like, oh, I'm so mentally tough I didn't have to take them. That's me like, oh, I only realistically needed three to get through the pain, but I
Yeah.
have like 37 pills left over. I mean, is that, think about somebody who's depressed, hates their life, feels like shit, they have this surgery, and they have all these pills that they take, and it makes them feel like a god, or makes them feel happy again, or makes them feel a euphoria that they've never felt before. I mean, is that not a temptation that almost is like at that point it's like human nature to just maybe, okay, I'll just take one more. I'll take two or three more. I mean, it's actually pretty easy to see how people fall into these strong addictions. And like you said, I mean, it's not complete blame on the doctor, but I don't know. I feel like it's a lot easier to become addicted to a substance, even if you're from an upper middle class background, uh, than we've made it seem up until this point. I don't think that's too difficult.
Well, I mean, this is such a large topic that we could come at from so many different angles. One sort of angle that I'd like to run by you, that I look at a lot of the drug addiction issues that we have. So I think that a huge root of the problem of drug addiction in America is it comes from people basically choosing not to participate in society. This started in the 60s with uh, the psychedelics movement and the what is it, tune in, drop out, or turn on, tune in, drop out, something like that was like the big motto. It was it was the first counterculture movements where you had a split in society of people who were like making money, having families, blah blah blah, and then these young people who were disillusioned with modern society, and they were saying, "No, screw this. We're gonna do drugs. We're gonna do acid and be naked and live in California and whatever." And to some extent, uh, there are some valid points raised by these counterculture movements. There are some valid criticisms of society, but at the end of the day, a lot of the people who chose to join these movements were not just criticizing society; they were saying we're leaving it. They were leaving society, and it's a nihilistic view of your own life, where you essentially just choose, rather than build a future for yourself, to just maximize your pleasure in the present, and it leads down a very dark path. And a lot of people were not aware of how dark that path was when these drugs were not in use for so long. But with increasing time into the 70s, into the 80s, into the 90s, it became very, very obvious that these drugs kill you. Heroin, opioids, meth, all these things kill you. And it's funny because the counter drug, like, the advertisements, the commercials that they made and stuff were just so stupid, and we can make fun of them. This is your brain on weed or whatever, frying an egg. They were terrible, but they were also very right about one thing, which is that weed was the gateway drug, and that's still true today. It's the easiest thing to access. It's almost always the first thing that people try. And the thing is, it's a very brain altering substance, and it's people who choose to do weed a lot oftentimes are choosing to do that for a reason, and it's because they're checking out and they're looking for a totally different view of their own life, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm going a little bit. I'm kind of steel manning this opinion more so than I actually hold it, but I'm steel manning the idea that most people who start doing drugs and continue doing drugs and continue escalating the drugs that they're taking into harder psychedelics or even into heroin or meth usually have a root inside of them that's basically choosing not to build a future for themselves, but to check out from society and not be a functioning member of society. That's a lot, I know.
Respond, Kevin.
I value your opinion. I appreciate your opinion. I disagree with some things that were said.
Sure.
Yeah, it's true. Back in the 80s and 90s, they said marijuana was a gateway drug. I disagree with that. Yes, marijuana usually is the first one that people come to, but it's like you said, it's the easiest to access. It's cheap. But I'll admit, I smoked weed half of my life, and I've never done anything else. I've never had the urge to try anything else. I've never said, "Ooh, weed's good. Let me try cocaine." It's never been like that. That's my personal experience. I can see how somebody who is real low in their life and things just aren't going well could see the opportunity to try something that's going to make them feel euphoric and forget about their issues.
I'm sure you have a lot more to say, but I do want to clarify something.
Yeah, this is a tough subject.
I definitely would not say that because weed is a gateway drug, and what I just said about like root causes, I'm not saying that no one should try weed or that weed will always lead you down a dark path of addiction. There are a lot of people who use weed responsibly, or at least functionally, where they can remain a functioning member of society. What I'm saying is that when people move on from weed to higher substances and more strong substances, usually they started weed for a different reason than the people who maybe just stay using weed and stay functional. I'm saying that there's the people who end up non-functioning members of societies tweaking out on the streets. Yes, there are circumstances that can be really tough on people. Yes, it's not all their fault. But at the end of the day, at some point, they made a decision to stop being responsible, to stop building a future for themselves, and to start prioritizing their own personal pleasure in the present time. That's how I look at it. But continue. I'm sorry I cut you off. But I just wanted to say, like,
No,
I do understand that people can use weed responsibly.
You're right there, and it comes down to responsibility and obligation. I mean, it's okay, and this is just my opinion. I know you guys agree, and the majority of America will disagree with this. It's okay to partake if you're responsible about it. Like, don't spend your entire paycheck on drugs and not pay your rent, not pay your cell phone bill, not pay your insurance. But if you got all your responsibilities out of the way and you've got a little extra cash and you're like, hey, let me buy enough to roll a joint or something, that's okay. And then the problem is these guys have access to harder stuff. So it's not. It's like, hey, I've got a little extra cash this week. Let me get an 8 ball of coke, and then they go and spend 3 days doing this 8 ball of coke, and next thing you know, they're fucking lost their job. They're broke up their relationship. Their kids hate them. It's because people get to a point where they're irresponsible. But the same thing happens with alcohol, which is legal. And the problem is that there is too much anxiety and stress in society right now that it's so much easier to want to escape and be euphoric and take drugs and feel this way because fuck that bullshit, man. Who wants to worry about their job? Who cares that the rent's a month behind? I want to sit here on my couch and I want to laugh at some cartoons. And that's the mindset that people are going through because they don't have the help and they don't have the the proper medication to control anxiety and stress and whatnot. And it's real easy. Drugs are real escape, a real easy escape to those feelings. And I could see that. I mean, I've lived that life where I'm surprised I haven't become a drug addict because of the shit that I've gone through. So I mean, I just don't want this to turn into a bashing on people who are addicted to drugs because there's a story behind it. Nobody just wakes up and says, I want to be a cokehead today. It's because they went through some shit, and the coke is helping them, cope. The weed's helping them cope, and it's just. I don't want to feel. I'm not saying drugs are good because drugs are not good. I feel there needs to be help for people, legal help. Like if somebody's going through stress at work and they're having anxiety issues, they need to be able to have the proper visits to the doctor, proper medication to cover their anxiety and stress. That way, they don't resort to self medicating and whatnot like that. And I don't know. It's just there's so many underlying issues that make this a problem.
I hear you, and the thing is, in my opinion, I believe that most of those avenues do exist. I would say that by and large, there are avenues to get help, medically, from friends, from family. If you don't have family, then there are hotlines and there are recovery centers, and none of it's perfect. A lot of the financial aspects of healthcare in America is pretty messed up, but the thing is, a lot of people manage to go through life without resorting to hard drugs, or a lot of people start to and they pull out of it, and that shows that it's possible. And as much as we can say that there are contributing factors to why people become addicts, at the end of the day, for me, the buck stops with you. The buck stops with the individual who goes down a dark path. And I think that becomes more clear when you look at people who have responsibilities. So a lot of people that go down that dark path are totally alone and whatever, and at the end of the day, they don't really hurt people besides themselves, and I guess the taxpayer, but I don't really care much about that. But there's a lot of people who have people who rely on them, who love them, parents or a wife, maybe even children, who have to watch a person become a husk of their former self and in many cases be abused. I mean, you see these people who have little kids while they're on drugs. They have babies while they're on drugs. They have babies with deformities, or they just miscarry them. It happens all the time. And these kids grow up in horrible, horrible homes, and most of the time those kids grow up themselves to lead terrible lives and often carry on a cycle of abuse and addiction. And I don't think that there's any defense for that.
I don't think the buck stops with the individual in every case because I mean, we have a government who we expect to protect us and act with our best interests in mind. And if things are pumped into society like legal drugs and pornography and alcohol, and I mean, they're regulated, but it's extremely easy to misuse those things. And I don't know. I just don't see how, like, I really do. I follow everything you're saying, but I don't think the conclusion of that is like the buck stops with the individual because humans are extremely susceptible to dopamine and it's literally hacking your brain. Like, I'm sure you've seen the studies where a monkey is, uh, put in a box and it can press a button and receive pleasure because there's like nodes placed on its brain. So it can press a button and receive pleasure. And in all of these cases, the monkey's just endlessly pressing the pleasure button until it just dies. It doesn't even eat or drink. And we are not above that in the sense that like we are still animals. So I think that if we have governing bodies and corporations and blah 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 whatever who are pumping things into society that can have this sort of endlessly press the button effect on humans and then some people fall susceptible to that. I'm not going to be like, hey man, you should have just picked yourself up by the bootstraps and not become addicted to this highly addictive substance. Like at the end of the day,
Well,
that's on you.
that doesn't make any sense to me at all. Because to me, it sounds like you would advocate for a society where there is no access to any dopamine causing things. I mean, if like obviously, uh,
That's not what I'm advocating for.
there are a lot of things in society that are, sort of dopamine buttons, like you were talking about with the monkey. Whether it's fast food,
Yeah.
a candy bar, caffeine,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
alcohol,
Yep.
cigarettes,
Yep.
nicotine.
We're on the same page.
Yeah. There's a lot of things, and so if you're saying that it's not a person's fault for for becoming addicted to those things, then it's the government's fault
No,
for
no, no, no,
allowing
no,
them
no.
to exist.
It's not an either or situation, but the buck doesn't stop with the individual because uh like their neurology well, I mean study of the brain. Their brain chemistry is literally being hacked and altered by these substances that are pumped into society. And they
Well, my
take
brain
some,
chemistry is being hacked by these substances,
yeah,
but
mine
I
too.
choose not to, you know, I choose to moderate, and I do better sometimes than other times. But like I think that to say that the buck doesn't stop with me is the abdication of responsibility. That's what causes this thing in the first place. If you don't believe that you are responsible for your own actions, then well, it's not my fault that I'm becoming addicted to this. It's someone else's fault. It's society's fault. Blah blah blah. That's what a lot of these people probably think as they're descending into a terrible life. I mean, do we not forge our own paths?
Yeah, we do forge our own paths, but we also are operating within the parameters that are set for us. Like you mentioned fast food, there's some people who are in economic brackets where they can't afford nutritious food. That's a huge problem in this country. I wouldn't say like, well, hey, you should have gone to somebody's farm and butchered one of their cows. You should have grown your own food. You should have bought stuff you can't afford. You should have bought stuff you don't have access to. Um,
I disagree with that.
you disagree
I
with that one as well?
well, healthy food is generally cheaper than fast food. Fast food is
That
hella
is not
expensive.
true. That is not true.
Dude, bread and eggs and
Well,
flour?
yeah, but are you gonna eat bread and eggs every day?
You
I mean,
can. That's what people
there are
used to
instances
do.
where you can go to the store and buy like the ingredients for like lasagna to make a lasagna, and it'll cost you $80 for one thing, one meal of lasagna.
Dude, I
Where you can
to
go
say
to
to say that groceries are more expensive than eating fast food all the time is insane. There is absolutely no way.
it is.
Okay.
I'm telling
All
you,
right,
it
all right.
is.
This is kind of what
It's.
I'm saying with the fast food
I
things.
mean, sometimes you get good deals on food. It depends on what your diet is, but like eggs have gone up, milk has gone up, bread has gone up, meat.
They're
I mean,
still
there was
cheaper.
Wait. I'm
how.
not necessarily saying. Look, so if you are poor and you are, let's just say, a single mother supporting a couple kids, you have to work full time. You might not have time to cook nutritious meals, and there is a McDonald's across the street. And all I'm proposing is that it's clearly bad for you, but it's available to you, and I don't know, like if it's
It also comes down
available,
to convenience too.
it comes down to convenience. Yep, yep.
This poor single mom's working 12 hours a day for $8 an hour. She
So
can barely afford groceries,
A
and she doesn't
loaf
want to
of
spend two
bread,
hours.
a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a jar of jelly will make you like 10 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for the same price as one Big Mac meal.
yeah, but
Like
there's literally no protein in that, and you need protein to
There's
not have
yeah,
peanut
that's
butter. Yes, there is. There's peanut butter.
but that's what
you
kid
need
is going to eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches 10 times in a row?
you need to eat meat. Human beings need to eat meat. You can't survive off of just you can't thrive off of just
Well,
plants,
I'm
especially
not
a
advocating for literally only eating peanut butter jelly sandwiches. There are a lot of cheap, nutritious options for how to eat. We have the internet now. You can go to the internet with a budget and say, "Hey, I have $60 a week to feed me and my child. How can I do this?" And it's possible. It's absolutely possible.
Okay, you're getting caught up on the food price thing because that's what you and Kevin are arguing. I'm trying to make a different point. I'm saying like in that scenario, if McDonald's is available and it's something like there's not somebody sitting there like, "Hey, you've come to this McDonald's 5 times this week. I can't allow you to have any more. That's too unhealthy." So it's if it's cheap and available and accessible to these people and they overeat it, your take is that that's completely their fault. Like you're viewing things like McDonald's and drugs and whatever else, alcohol, nicotine, as like societal pitfalls that these people have to like toe the line of, and if they fall into it, it's like essentially just their fault completely. And that's a
So
fine perspective, but I'm just like trying to clarify, is that what you're saying?
I think that there may be a little bit of a disconnect where what I'm trying to say is that I understand a lot of the factors that go into why this happens and why people make decisions in the way that they do. I understand convenience. I understand the dopamine button. I understand all of these things. When I say the buck stops with a person, it's not to say that they bear 100% responsibility for everything in their life. What I'm saying is that at the end of the day, every person is unless they have severe disabilities, they are a person who can make choices and can analyze their own life and should. They have the responsibility. It's what responsibility is. It means that because you exist in this world, you have to operate within it in a good manner. You have to try to be a good person. You have to try to live a good life. That's part of what we're here for. And so, yeah, I understand why a single mom would go to McDonald's all the time because it's easy. But if I am that single mom, if I put myself in her shoes, I wouldn't say, "Well, this is just how society is, and it's not my fault." I would say, "Okay, I need to pick myself up by my bootstraps. I need to figure out how to budget for this and this and this." That's what we do. That if you're advocating for not having responsibility and for not determining your own destiny, you're advocating for the downfall of society.
I'm not advocating for that. I'm saying take the McDonald's off of every street corner. Take
So that's what I just said. When I said that you were advocating for society removing all of the dopamine
no,
buttons,
no,
you
no,
said that
no.
wasn't what you were advocating
No, no,
for.
no, no, no. That's not because you're saying the exact extreme of like my point. You're picking up on what I'm saying and you're taking it to the fullest extreme to make it seem ridiculous because that would be ridiculous if I was advocating for that. I said McDonald's on every street corner, and I said take some of the percentage of drugs out of society. That is actually very doable. But I see this is getting into a thing
No,
that's
I
so
mean I misunderstood. I mean, sure, if you want to advocate for like certain moderating policies
yes,
on
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
availability, because I agree with like cigarettes should probably be more expensive to make it a more, uh, to make it harder to be addicted to cigarettes. I mean, it's kind of messed up, but that's what we are doing. We tax cigarettes for that purpose. I can agree with that.
So I'm curious, Alex. Do you have any addictions that you want to talk about?
I've had addictions, and I have.
And not all addictions are drugs. I mean, some people are
Yeah,
addicted to porn. Some people like me are addicted to food. So I mean, everybody's got some kind of vice that they get stuck on.
yeah.
So
Obviously, I
I'm
mean, for
curious what
me,
yours is.
the main thing would probably be caffeine. That would probably be number one. But I also very intentionally moderate my caffeine intake to a healthy level. I'm dependent on it, but it's also a healthy level that I'm functional with.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not, that like being aware of it is step one, and then being like, okay, how much is an okay amount to have? And when you start thinking like, oh man, if I had that third cup of coffee today, that would make me feel better, then really stop and think, hey, is this necessary, or can I suffer through and just have two? Um, that's the kind of thinking that keeps you from just escalating the amounts of things that you take into infinity. Um, I have had addictions to other substances that I would rather not discuss. Um, but I'm very intentional with my usage. I will say I've been addicted to nicotine before. That's one of the most common and one of the hardest to break, ironically. Um, and yeah, I've had my run in with that, and it's obvious when you're addicted to something. It's very obvious. Uh, Once it happens, you know, and you have a crossroads of, am I going to take steps to alleviate this condition that I have, or am I going to give into it? Everyone has that choice.
Wait, guys, let's put a quick pin in this. I'm about to go have an addiction with pissing in my toilet, so I'll be right back.
I'm also addicted to peeing. I didn't want to admit that, but I do it several times a day. Um, Here,
What's up,
I'll just
people?
restart the sentence that I was starting to say. Um, I was starting to say to Kevin that I really don't want to make it sound like I think that overcoming addictions is easy, or that going through life and having terrible things happen to you and not resorting to coping mechanisms such as drugs is easy. I know that it's not. Um, the reason that I say I've been to some places and come out of them is not to say that it's easy. It's to say that I know that it's hard, and I know it can be a lot harder than what I've experienced. The thing is that I just have a an aversion to diverting blame to other sources, even when it can sometimes exist. I put the most importance on the personal aspect of it.
Yeah, man, we don't think you're trying to like, completely just degrade people who are addicted. No, I don't think that at all. We're just having a constructive conversation. And I do think if you've truly been addicted and overcome it, that I mean that's good. That's a good thing. I think that does probably give you some credit. I mean, you've never been addicted to opioids. That's a
No,
kind of a
yeah,
different story, but I know what you're saying.
yeah, absolutely not. And I know people who have been addicted to all sorts of things. Um,
Do I
and
know them?
no. Well, I mean, you might know one or two that I'm thinking of, but more so in other circles of my life, I have seen several different substances, and I've seen what it can do to people. Uh, and I've also seen the correlation of sort of that checking out. Um, it's not just like everything in their life is completely normal and healthy and happy, and this drug just takes them out because it's so powerfully addictive. It's usually corresponding to a an attitude towards life that is laissez-faire. It's irresponsible. It's you know screw society, screw whatever. I'm gonna do my own thing, and yeah.
To be clear though, the death of a person can actually happen far before that checking out stage. Like the death can still happen in the euphoric, happy party stage. Oh, I'm just trying this thing out, but it was laced with fentanyl and now I'm dead. That happens a lot. And that is not a person who is checked out. And that is a person who, in a lot of cases, is actually contributing to society and has a lot of people who love them and is a functional human. So I think that, there's so many distinctions we have to make here that we just simply do not have time to make that, we're just doing our best to have this conversation, but there's so many nuances that we have to keep in mind.
Absolutely agreed. And when I first brought up this whole angle, that's why I kind of tried to call it an angle, is like this is one sort of arrow into the amorphous blob of this topic, and it does not apply to even a majority of people who have drug problems or are negatively affected by drugs. And yeah, I mean, like you just mentioned, party goers, the party scene is a totally different thing. I would still say that there are responsible and irresponsible decisions you can make at a party, and taking anything that was acquired illegally or you don't know how it was acquired is always a bad choice. But you know, coming back, the long road back to A Scanner Darkly. Uh, my rating for this movie is probably around like a 7 out of 10. Overall, I like this movie. It gets a high rating. Um, but I do have issues with it, including, like I mentioned, things being distracted from a point that I'm more interested in. Also, the pacing being so closely following the book that it kind of doesn't work as well as a movie in terms of pacing. One other thing is that I do think that it takes a lighter tone than the story kind of deserves. Um, and I understand that Richard Linklater directed it, and he is a comedy director first and foremost. He actually did School of Rock, which I think is a fantastic movie, and he did Dazed and Confused, which is also awesome and very funny. Linklater, he's a comedy man, and I do think that A Scanner Darkly is funny. I think a lot of the performances are hilarious, including, so the guy who plays Charles Freck, his name is Rory Cochrane. I'm not sure how to say it. He was in Dazed and Confused. He was the stoner. It was bothering me. I was like, I know this guy's face because he's got the bugs over him and he's looking back and forth, and I was like, I recognize this face, and it was from Dazed and Confused 13 years earlier, and I like to imagine that that's the same character just down the line. um, but anyways, his performance is hilarious. Robert Downey Jr. is absolutely perfect for Barris. He is a total idiot and so pretentious, and he delivers his lines so great. I think this is one of my favorite RDJ roles.
He
I
was good
thought
for he was good for that role.
I thought he was sort of an intellectual, to be honest.
Well, he's smart, but he acts like he knows everything when in reality he knows some, but he's always speaking as if he knows everything. And I've known people like this who, they have a brain, but they have to act like they're literally God about everything. And
Are you
I
throwing
think
shade at me?
no,
Okay.
these people I can't be friends with. They're compulsive liars. And Barris is a very hateable character, but I think he's pretty hilarious.
When he went in the house and got the hammer, that shit was funny.
And of course, Woody Harrelson, he's always funny.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it meshed super well with some of the darker tones of the movie. And again, I think that some sacrifices were made to make the movie more lighthearted, where it could have addressed some of the issues that we were just talking about a little bit more clearly. For instance, like in the book, when Bob Arctor, he gets turned down by Donna, and he just goes and finds some chick and ends up sleeping with her at his place. In the book, the girl that he sleeps with is a heroin addict who is like pretty far down the line. She is physically deteriorated. She has a very bony face, like she's not attractive at all. And it puts you in the mind of someone who's so desperate that it doesn't even matter that this person he's sleeping with is like physically repulsive. In the movie, she's perfectly fine looking. And I just felt like that missed out a little bit.
Yeah. And I don't have the context of reading the book, but I thought some of the lighter and more comedic tones actually helped the film because the overall tone that it was going for, in my opinion, is supposed to be erratic. Like you're on drugs and you're watching this thing, you're watching these characters who are human, but they don't look human anymore because of the rotoscoping. They look like animated characters. Like it is, I think it actually helps the tone, and that's my personal opinion about that. Because it's like one scene you're laughing, Robert Downey Jr. is like, oh, I just wanted to grab a hammer, and then he tries to fight Woody Harrelson, and they're both wearing, or Woody Harrelson's wearing this crazy wig, and it's funny. And then two scenes later, Keanu Reeves is like forgetting who he even is and like having sex with a prostitute, and it's just erratic. It's all over the place, and I thought that helped the film, in my opinion.
I could probably agree with that. If I reflected on that a little bit, I might fully agree with you on that one. And I do enjoy the funny parts of it. Everything down to like the costumes, or just what they're wearing. Like in that hammer scene that you guys are talking about, I was cracking up at what Robert Downey Jr. was wearing. He's wearing like mid-length pants that go down to like his calves, and they're like high-waisted. Everything he's wearing is just ridiculous.
The problem I had with it is Robert Downey Jr. and Keanu Reeves and Woody
Woody.
Harrelson, all great actors. They did really good for their roles. But when the three came together, it did not form any kind of story for me. Um, I think it could have been better. I love each of those actors individually. They're all great actors, and I was excited to see all three of them that were in this movie. But the dialogue didn't come together for me at all. Sometimes I felt like they were just talking about random things, which I guess makes sense because they're on drugs the whole time. But I couldn't. I had a hard time following. I had to rewind it sometimes just to see what he said and see how it made sense to the narrative.
Personally, I actually don't like Keanu Reeves very much. I wouldn't say I dislike him. I'm just sort of ambivalent towards him. I've never found his performances to be very compelling, and I think in terms of casting decisions, he's probably for me the worst casting decision in this movie. I don't think he does Bob Barker.
You ever seen Point
justice.
Break?
I haven't.
Okay, that's why you feel that way then.
Probably.
So,
To be honest, I didn't think Donna was a famous actress. I didn't even perceive that she was Winona Ryder until the scene where she's laying in the bed, like when Bob has done what he did with that prostitute, and then he's like it's switching between the prostitute's face and Donna's face. I was like, oh my god, that's Winona Ryder, dude. Like I don't know if it was an issue with the rotoscoping, but she did not look like herself throughout like the
yeah,
entirety
but
of the film.
you
Up
pick it
until
up.
that
You pick
point.
it up on the voice instantly. As soon as you
I
hear her
didn't.
voice, you know that's her. Yeah.
I didn't, unfortunately.
I picked up her face pretty quickly, but I may have also seen like her name pop up before I saw her. I'm not sure.
Hmm.
One thing that I think they missed a little bit on in the movie, and I don't like to criticize a movie just for deviating from the book. In fact, this is a case of a movie that I think should have deviated more in order to make the pacing fit a film better. But one thing that they did that I disagreed with was okay, Charles Freck in the movie is the Bugs guy, right? And he's present throughout the whole movie. And towards the end of the movie, he tries to kill himself and fails. Well, in the book, Charles Freck is not the Bugs guy. Jerry Fabin is. He's at the very start of the book. It establishes a character who has Jerry Fabin is not in the movie at all. He's got bugs crawling all over him. He's losing his mind, and he's friends with all of the circle that we know in the movie. And he ends up being committed to a psych place, a recovery place, and his brain is totally fried. He's gone. And in the entire story, the characters that we know are aware that this has happened. They talk about like, oh, maybe I shouldn't take so much substance D, or I'm going to end up like Jerry. They know what it does, and they've seen it happen to one of their friends, real time. And I think that works really well. In the movie, it's I get that they were trying to simplify things, have less characters, but having Charles be like hanging around them as he's having the bugs thing go on, and he doesn't go to a mental hospital, and then he just stops hanging out with them and tries to kill himself later, I just don't think it works as well.
Yeah, that would go back to you having the context of the book and us not having the context of the book. Like I can see where you're coming from, but I just can't relate to it because I don't have that added context. But that is good information to know. I did hear that yeah, the Freck character was kind of an amalgamation of multiple characters from the book
Hmm.
in terms of like the qualities he expresses. But as somebody that's never read the book, I think the character works fine, but again, that's just because I don't have the same context as you.
I guess he doesn't interact with them very much. And honestly, I think what maybe would have worked better is if they had made the character Jerry Fabian be committed at the start, and then eliminate Charles Freck from the entire story because he doesn't do hardly anything. Like the only time he really interacts with the characters is when he shows up like midway through the movie as they're at the hammer scene once again. He basically shows up, they're doing that, and he's like, I don't like the vibes here, and he leaves. And then the only other time we see him is when he tries to kill himself, but we have zero context for it. And it's like they tried to shave down the character of Charles Freck so much that I think they should have just gotten rid of that, and they could have had Fabian's downfall hanging over their heads throughout the film of like, oh, I hope I don't end up like him.
Yeah, that I can see how that could have been better, but again, I feel like they showed enough of Freck. Like, I mean, the opening scene with him with the bugs and so paranoid that he's like looking at his dog's fur and then washing himself and his dog in the shower. I liked that scene a lot. It
Oh,
let
I
you
did
know,
too.
yeah, it lets you know what extent to what extent the drugs were affecting this man. And I was going to ask you guys. I know the film is not meant to be like clear in terms of what's happening when I first watched the film, which was today, I've only seen it once. I thought that Charles Freck did kill himself, and in the end, when he's in the rehab center and he no longer has his hair, and they say the quote like the dead should never request the help of the living, but if the dead can help the living, they should. I botched that, but I thought that was trying to say that at that point, Keanu or Fred Bruce at that point is just so mentally fried that he's literally seeing someone who has died from these drugs and someone from his past, but it's not actually Charles. So I know I said that in a really complicated way, but I thought that Charles clearly died. He's seeing the interdimensional being reading off his sins in a drug induced, you know, little bit of final moments. And then he appears later in the rehab scene when Bruce is just completely fried and you don't know what's happening. So I don't know. I don't know if it's like definitively saying that Charles didn't die because he shows up in that end scene. Because I chose to perceive it as he is dead.
I missed him in the end scene. I must have missed that part.
He was bald in the end scene.
I would say, according to the book, he did not actually successfully kill himself.
Hmm.
As for whether you're supposed to think that in the movie, I would argue no, but I think that it's also an interesting interpretation that if that's how you perceived it, I mean, it doesn't break the story in any way. But no, I think that the point of it was supposed to say that like he thought that he was getting pills that were like downers that were just gonna basically kill him when combined with alcohol, I guess. Um, but instead they were psychedelics, and so he just had to go through like an extended, very intense psychedelic trip, which you know supposedly can last like what feels like thousands of years to the person who goes through it. Uh, but yeah, it's an interesting perspective.
I'm probably wrong, but yeah, that's how I viewed it when I first watched.
So, Alex, you gave this movie a 7?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's where I'd put it.
What about you, Will? Where are you at on the scale?
I would say like a 6. 6.5, 6. Because it's like an experience that, I've been through it now and I'm happy that I watched it. I probably wouldn't actively seek this out and I probably wouldn't recommend it to other people or watch it again, but I enjoyed it. So I would say 6.5 just for the experience. I think it's well done, for what it's trying to be. I did enjoy it, but it's just not like again, like I said about an hour ago, I'm looking at this as more of like a project or like a litmus test rather than a finished stereotypical film. That's so I feel like I watched more of like a student film, a very experimental student film rather than a cleanly packaged typical film. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it does make my rating a little weird. So I'll say 6.5.
I'm gonna give this one a 5. I appreciate what they were trying to do with the rotoscope, and it was unique in that aspect, but it felt to me like it didn't come together in the end. Like it wasn't an overall. I guess you could say I agree with Wilby, and that's a project. It just didn't feel like it was a finished project. I felt like it was a work in progress.
Yeah. I would say at the end of the day, there's a lot to discuss, a lot to critique, a lot to praise. I think ultimately sort of my description for it would be that it okay, it's a movie about addiction, and it's an empathetic movie about addiction, which I appreciate. But I think it takes more of a uh, like a mental toll, or it demonstrates the mental toll and the loss of your own sanity more so than other movies about addiction do. I think so. Like Requiem for a Dream is awesome movie. Beautiful Boy is a fantastic movie. I think that they focus a little bit more on the physical dependence, and on what it does to people around you. And this movie focuses more on what it's like to lose your own identity, uh, and I think that's unique.
What'd you guys think about the Alex Jones cameo? That caught me so off guard, but it was a perfect cast for him.
Wait, was that Alex Jones?
The guy with
The
the
guy with
bullhorn.
the what? That didn't.
That
It didn't sound like him.
no, that was literally Alex Jones. Like that was, yeah, 100%. Damn, Alex, I'm surprised you didn't know that. Yep, Alex Jones cameo right in the film.
What?
I'll be honest with you, I have no idea who that even is.
Damn,
Oh my
man.
goodness! It is him. Wow.
Oh, is that radio host guy?
Yeah, Infowars.
I don't know why.
That's
I
right.
should have recognized his voice at least. Man.
Alex, it looked just like him, man. It looked more the Alex
Well,
Jones
he looks a little
rotoscope.
different now than he did 20 years ago, but I will say though that scene actually specifically did kind of rub me the wrong way as well, though, because for one, it's not in the book. It's one of the very, 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 very few things that they chose to add in to the film, and it's just a random scene of showing that the government doesn't let people protest. It's like, and just kidnaps them. I was like, what? Why is this? Why do we need to be so paranoid in this film? I don't know.
It's the theme, man. It's just the theme.
Eh. Eh.
Like the film was in no way trying to be a one-to-one parallel with reality, and literally no, like the dialogue wasn't even how normal humans talk. Everybody was a caricature of what they were trying to portray. Like, dude, I get what you're saying, but it's not like it was historical fiction or something. I mean, it's an extremely exaggerated, almost comic book like film.
Uh, I think that it's meant to map onto reality to some extent. I don't think that it's meant to be a completely fictional universe that has no bearing on the world that we live in. Obviously, it's hyperbolic. Obviously, it's, unrealistically dialed up to the extreme. But I think that the criticisms for our society are still there.
True, but I mean, it's just like Idiocracy. I mean, I would say that's a somewhat similar level of satire.
And that movie rubs me the wrong way as well.
Oh, okay.
This
Never
is
mind.
probably
Well,
more a
at
me
least you're
problem.
consistent. At least you're consistent.
Yeah, it's really it's a me problem. I wouldn't say that the movie is worse for having those things. Well, especially because it's true to the source material. Um, but it's something like I said, it's more of like a Philip K. Dick criticism that I don't like how obsessed he is with the police state and surveillance and all of that stuff. It's like I get it, but it's not as bad as you're saying it is, and it would never would be, in my opinion. But
Yeah.
there's so much more that we could go into, but I don't think it's necessary.
Alex, I like how, as we've established, the rehab center for the drug recovery center, whatever you want to call it, called New Path within the film. So it turns out they are the main antagonists who have been working behind the scenes. They are marketing themselves as a drug rehabilitation center, but they are taking addicts and making them grow more drugs to be sold for profit. So they're creating a problem, selling themselves as the remedy, but then just making a vicious cycle where they get paid and create more addicts. But at the same time, the police are actively trying to make Bob Arctor as addicted to drugs as possible so that his mind will completely fry itself, shatter itself, so that they can essentially use him as a drone without autonomy who gets sent to this rehab center and then collects data for them. So both the evil antagonist New Path Rehab Center are trying to create addicts, and the police are trying to create an addict in Bob. And if you notice, obviously he's being monitored by Winona Ryder, aka Audrey, while he's within the rehab center. He doesn't know who he is at this point, but he picks up a flower. So the police have no idea how these people are making this substance D. But Keanu Reeves picks up a flower and he's like, "Oh, my friends would like this," even though he doesn't even know who his friends are anymore. Puts it in his sock, and that is the first step for this whole entire drug ring to be brought to its knees. The police are going to find out how they're making the substance, where they're located, and that's how they are allegedly going to resolve this issue. But I just think it's interesting how the antagonist and the protagonist within the film are both doing the same thing to get what they want. The rehab center is creating addicts to make more money. The cops are creating addicts to try to infiltrate the drug rehabilitation center. So it's like all this huge vicious cycle where addicts at the end of the day are the ones getting perpetually shit on from every angle. And I think that's what they were trying to go for.
That sort of the insanity of the lengths that the police are willing to go to is definitely I think it's probably a pretty valid criticism. I am not very educated on sort of, I don't know, how police operate to find drug distributors, but I do know that there are a lot of undercover agents, and I do know that undercover agents oftentimes live in dangerous and bad circumstances, for a long period of time to become a trusted member of a certain circle. And that's probably one of the hardest jobs that exist. And, it's dialed up to the extreme in this movie where not only are they an undercover agent, but they at least think that the police don't even know who they are, that they have to like edit themselves out of their own footage that they're in, and so they're like pretending that they're not someone, and I don't even know how to describe it. It's confusing.
Okay, well, let me ask you guys this. So, if you were wearing a suit that turned you into a shifted blur of random features and no one knew who you were, and people were referring to you as a different name, and you were tasked with investigating yourself and watching surveillance footage of yourself for days and weeks on end, even without the influence of drugs, do you think you would start to view yourself as separate from your actual self?
Well, to some extent you would have to, just because the person who's on the tape has different goals and different mannerisms than the person who is reviewing the tape. Like just the fact that you have a switch that you flip where I'm in my law enforcement switch and I'm around law enforcement people and I'm thinking about how to, bust people, versus then I have to throw on the switch where I'm a doper and, I'm just, tripping and talking about random stuff with my friends. Like, yeah, even without the drugs, I do think you would definitely dissociate.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of questions raised by this movie, and part of why I give it a somewhat high mark of a 7. And for some people, a 7 is not a very high mark. For me, it's actually quite good. And a big part of the reason for that is just because there is so much to talk about. It raises so many legitimate questions, and there's so much to talk about in it. I think that in of itself is commendable.